Benchmarks, the show where we look behind the numbers and dive into the decisions, incentives, and operating moves that actually shift performance in healthcare and other businesses. Thank you all for joining us, whether you're a healthcare executive, a department lead, or a physician, a patient, a business owner, or an innovator. We're all here working to improve how care is delivered. I'm your host, Stephanie Dorwart, the founder and CEO of Altius Healthcare Consulting Group, where we partner with hospitals and healthcare organizations to improve productivity, staffing effectiveness, operations, leadership, and everything in between. Today, I am honored to be joined on the stage by Scott Becker, a longtime healthcare attorney and partner at McGuire Woods, and the founder and publisher of Becker's Healthcare, one of the most influential platforms and event engines in the US and healthcare in general, and it's been active for over 20 years. If you've ever listened to Becker's Healthcare podcast or attended one of their conferences, you've heard the cadence of what's changing right now from leaders in the industry. Scott, it's a pleasure and honor to welcome you here today to Beyond the Benchmarks. If you can start by just sharing a little bit about your background.
Stephanie, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you. You've done an incredible job building your team and your company. So impressive. My name's Scott Becker. I've essentially straddled two careers for a long time. They ended up being very synergistic. I was a lawyer by background in the healthcare world. About 30 years ago, started Becker's Healthcare, but it didn't start as Becker's Healthcare. It started as a very small newsletter. We had a very small conference in a very specific sector. We had a very small newsletter, and excited and passionate about what we were doing in the media side, not so much the law side, and ended up building teams, hiring great people, have partners at Becker's Healthcare that have been with me for literally 20 years now, and ended up building a media company around hospitals and health systems, surgery centers, health IT, and a bunch of other areas. Obviously, in a lot of ways, we're an observer, and that really drive it are the nurses, the doctors, the CEOs, the leaders, the chief operating officers, the chief everythings that drive healthcare. We get a chance to observe and work closely with a lot of those people. So it's been a great privilege. But those are the two careers we've really straddled over a very long time, which is healthcare media world of being engaged in that. And that's been first and foremost for a long time. Plus, as background, being a healthcare lawyer at some point and still involved in it, but not really involved in some of our clients, involved in some of our partners, but really don't practice law directly like I did at one time.
That's amazing. And you have built such a remarkable following through Becker's Healthcare. And it's been around my entire healthcare career. I can remember subscribing to my first newsletter probably about 25 years ago while I was working at the first hospital. So I've learned a lot of my healthcare information from the newsletters and from the experience. And Scott, you're hearing from leaders, from C-suite executives, from businesses, investors every day in the work that you do. And in the environment that we're all dealing with right now, there is tons of noise, a lot of challenges, I'd say a lot of obstacles that leaders are facing. And what are you really paying attention to right now? And what do you think is the most important about what's facing healthcare in today's environment and where we're headed?
The most interesting issues revolve around this great balance of technology and people. Understand, it's got to be both. It's not going to be one or the other. So when you hear people on X or Twitter or the internet say, we don't need more doctors because technology is going to take care of it, I just think that's absolutely wrong. I think it's very much a trust but verify situation. It's just like preventive health. We need preventive health, but that's not going to eliminate the need for doctors. We need both. In the largest nations in the world that went all in on preventive health and don't have doctors and nurses have really suffered. So I think when I look at this, technology versus people, it's not technology versus people, it's technology and people. And it's a constant effort to have best teams and the best technology. And it's a constantly evolving world. It's where the technology is really making the difference that you want it to make. And I think often people are surprised when all of a sudden the technology that they didn't think was going to be that important ends up being very important and becomes a must-have, just like ambient listening the last couple of years, versus things that were talked about for a very long time, and then all of a sudden become front and center in part of the way that you do work. So I think this balance between technology and people, I think, is so important, and embracing both is so important, Stephanie. That's where I start with. But it's often for years people talked about fee for service versus value-based care. Again, it's always going to be both. It's not one or the other.
And it's actually increased the amount of time that it takes per visit because those providers don't understand how to utilize it. So yes, we have to balance it, but we have to balance it all in an effective way. And I really found a lot of value in that point.
It's we've had lawyers over the years, many that are great, that are very client-centric, others that are brilliant, but they can't connect the dots for clients. And it's very similar with technology. I mean, the shame of what you mentioned with ambient listening is if somebody has a bad experience with it, they're likely not going to come back to it until they have to, until it's become just everybody's using it, so they have to, or it's become much easier for them to use. And that's not, that I think is less on the user and more on the company and the way that it's implemented to make sure that the best of these companies have on-site user teams. They have people that are really making it easy. You're not just throwing technology at people. You're trying to make to do enough troubleshooting early. Is one of the things we talk about in the sales cycle today is if people don't see ROI relatively quickly, they won't move forward with it. They might even buy the license to start with, but they won't continue. And there's this constant desire by leadership to limit the amount of different programs and products and enterprise programs and modules that people are using. So you got to make sure whatever you're doing is useful and people see ROI on it relatively quickly, which is complicated and challenging.
And what comes to mind for me when you're talking about all that, Scott, is really that structure creates the results. Like them or hate them. My chair is the Pittsburgh Steelers, and Mike Tomlin's been their coach for years and years and years. And his most famous quote is this: the standard is the standard. And I think about that with deployment of technology is you really have to have the standards in place and the governance of those standards and then structures around it so that your team can really create those results.
Again, it's like we talked about before, technology and people. So you could have a company with great processes, but if they don't have great people working within those processes, they're still not going very far. Same thing with any health system or any team. It's just like Mike Tomlin. He's been at it for 18, 19 years now. He's one of the longest running NFL coaches. Over years, he's had great talent, not so great talent to get the best process in the world, but he's also got to have talent. And so it's similar with health systems, processes, standards, governance. I do Some people get so deeply into process and standards and governance that, and it's very important, the process, the governance, and the standards, especially as you're starting to use AI for diagnosis and for other things, to know that you've got guardrails, it's actually going to work, it's actually going to do what it says it's going to do. But you also can't get people that are so process driven that they lose sight of the fact we need humans to use this and to work with it and to make them work together. And I think it's that constant balance of tech and people is what we talk about in building great teams, building great technology, and having them work together. And the unfortunate thing or the challenging thing is, as a system today, you almost need to be large enough to be able to afford to invest in the technology, invest in the people, so you've got great tech and great people to deliver care. And it's made it very hard for small systems to really thrive. And it's a real challenge and a shame. Reasonably lower margin business and adding a lot of debt on it. And this is just a disastrous combination. Lots of debt that has lots of interest cost to go with a business that doesn't have the margins to really support that debt or has too much fragility around that debt. And so, for example, when you look at, and the shame of this in private equity, so private equity in practices, we'll talk about that very quickly because it's simple to understand for me and for others, is if private equity is investing in orthopedics where there's really good margins and they put some debt on it, they generally could still thrive and still invest in the company, still bring in great doctors, still grow. And there's companies that are doing that, like Hopco and some others. There's some really successful orthopedic platforms. This is a prescription for people talk famously in private equity about you're going to sell part of it up front, then you're going to get a second bite at the apple, and that second bite of the apple never seems to come, or it's like a poison apple and so forth. This combination of high debt and low margins is a disaster. Bad high debt, low margins, that's where you get these dividend recaps and so forth. The Steward situation is a shame. There are other private equity driven hospital systems that have done really well. The thing about, and I'm not going to defend Steward at all, but if they had 34 hospitals, and Prospect is similar, there were a certain number of those hospitals that were in the process of going broke when private equity invested in them. So for example, I don't know how many of the 34 hospitals were already in horrendous shape when Stewart took over, but there were probably a dozen of them that were. And so I don't really blame Stewart for that, but those are very challenging situations. We're already at a spot in the country where 40% of hospitals are operating at no margin. Many of them are smaller, many of them are independent, many of them are challenging footprints, and 60% of hospitals have some margin. But there are private equity driven health systems that are doing sponsored health systems that are doing well. I think the last number I saw was 7 or 8% of health systems have a private equity partner. So it's a relatively small number of the 5,000 hospitals, but it's not a nothing number. But a good deal of those operate fine. It's private equity is it's easy as a populist, as a Democrat or Republican, to point the finger at private equity, but it's not really one flavor. It's not all the same. It's all over the board. It's private equity that over by its nature, private equity uses debt and uses leverage. So if you hate leverage and debt, you're not going to like private equity, but leverage and debt's not unique to private equity, but it's the overuse of it, it's the abuse of it, it's the piling it onto low margin businesses that's the real problem. That's where you really end up with disasters. And we see a lot of that.
Yeah, and to that point, Scott, whenever it's used right and you're leveraging that debt for positive outcomes, whether it's to enhance the physical capital and the buildings of those organizations to make them better, it works extremely well and it can actually enhance the organization's outcomes. When it's not used in those ways, it can really move in a different direction. However, if we can use that as a jumping off point to talk about a statistic that you just mentioned, you shared that about 40% of hospitals are losing money, and probably many of those hospitals that were acquired were losing money or almost bankrupt when they were acquired.
Hospital in a remote rural area, you live in a macro world that, regardless of what you do, is a very challenging world because payers in that area are slim, commercial patients are slim, just in a challenging area, and you can't control that macro area. Not if you want to keep on serving that area, but then you live in a micro world of how do you decide what you're going to do and what you're not going to do to really serve that community and maintain some margin so you keep yourself in business. I was on the phone yesterday with a CEO who runs a major health system in a state that's 50th of 50th out of commercial pay and government pay. And if you're 50th, 50th, you're living in a tough environment because the market for physicians is national. The markets for staff is pretty national. It's not completely national, but certainly for physicians it is. And one of the great challenges we've had over the last 20 years is every doctor and his or her spouse wants to today live in the top 25 metro areas. And I don't know, given the shortages of doctors generally, and given that people have choices about where they live, I don't know how you change that. But we've got this incredibly challenging distribution of physicians, and we have an incredible shortage of physicians. And so I'm not. But when I talk to health system leadership, we were talking yesterday about mergers and acquisitions with another colleague in hospitals and health systems. There are a few different things that drive mergers and acquisitions. One is you've got those 40% of hospitals that may need a dance partner. And it doesn't mean that every single one of those does, but they just might need a partner to be able to keep it going, to keep it working, to keep things like thriving and moving. We saw yesterday another hospital, happened to be a Pennsylvania hospital, was closing labor and delivery. This is not something that health systems do because they want to do it. People blame them for it, but they're not doing it because they want to do it. They're doing it because they just can't staff it. They don't have enough obstetricians, gynecologists to make it work. They can't make it work and do it safely. So they close labor and delivery, which is a disaster, but it's not the blame. I don't place it with the health system. I place it with, we've got a structural problem, not enough OB-GYNs, not enough doctors, not enough nurses, et cetera, et cetera. So one set of hospital systems that do M&A is they have to do it. They're in trouble. A second set is doing it because they need enough scale. If you want to invest in physicians, you want to invest in technologies, you want to be great. The reality of any business, and you know this as a business owner yourself, is you're periodically going to take different risks, different investments, and some of those are going to work, some of those aren't going to work. If you hire as a consulting firm 100 consultants, 50 are going to be great, 50 are going to not with you in 10 years. I'm generalizing about numbers, but that's probably at best. And the same thing with hiring staff, hiring physicians, trying technology. If you're a health system, you have to have enough lack of fragility that you could make those investments and know some are going to go great, some are not going to go great, but we got to be able to continue to fight and survive for another day. So you have a lot of health systems that have to merge to get enough scale, so they keep on investing, keep on trying to be great, keep on trying to grow. Another reason you've got health systems looking at M&A and combinations is you've got this incredible mismatch or imbalance where you've got payers, the top four payers are four of the largest 20 companies in America. And that's not a knock on them, but United, Aetna, Cigna, Elevance are four of the largest companies in America by revenues. Two of those are top of the top five. So after Walmart and Amazon, you get very quickly to United and CVS. If you're a health system negotiating on the other side of that, your leverage, let alone a health system, a small health system, large health system, your leverage vis-a-vis them is very challenging to negotiate with them. If you're a small practice or a smaller entity, it's even worse. So you've got these real power imbalances, and many have to get bigger to be able to compete with that and deal with that, and have to be anti-fragile so that they can't do a deal with that payer. They still can survive to fight another day and continue to take care of their community. So we see a lot of those issues on the M&A front and on the where hospitals are at in dealing with both their macro environment and their micro environment. And we see great leadership. We see great leadership a lot. We talk about this often. We see health systems that at one time were thought of as secondary health systems that have really remade themselves over the course of a couple decades into first-tier health systems. And it's really remarkable to see. You're in Pennsylvania, UPMC started with some market strength, but has rebuilt themselves into a major international force as a health system. And similarly, I look at Jefferson and the combination, the consolidation they've done, and I know Joe Cascione's trying to put it all together to make it all work, but it's incredible what they've grown into between Jefferson, between Lehigh Valley, between the combination, and trying to make that all work. It's literally a remarkable effort they've put together to make that all work. And it's Highmark and Lehigh and West Penn have also done a tremendous job. But it's some of these systems weren't serious systems 30 years ago, and they've grown into being very significant systems. And it's really impressive. We see it throughout the country, and it's not easy. But it's not easy. If you start at one altitude and latitude to become a different level latitude, that's a war and an effort.
It is definitely a war and an effort. And when you're thinking about building systems, one of the things that I often see is sometimes systems are piecemeal together and they don't necessarily become one operating entity, one operating organization. And I think that's a really important piece for us to note too, is when you're building systems and scale, it's important to keep that in mind as those systems grow and evolve.
100%. And some of them really do become systems. Some become confederations of multiple different hospitals. And at some point, they've got to have that balance of local leadership combined with something that they do synergistically that makes it all make sense.
Released the Entrepreneur's Edge, which was a tactical playbook really for building and selling and sustaining business. And you also have another book coming out in June. Would you talk about your new book that's really built for business leaders and what you're hoping to achieve with that? I think it looks
Sure.
exciting. I've already pre-ordered it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that, Stephanie. If you could ask your friends to pre-order too, we'd appreciate it. No, so we had written 100 years ago. I say 100 years ago, I'm obviously exaggerating, but 20 plus years ago, I'd written a number of healthcare books and healthcare business books, healthcare legal books, and a great experience. A few years ago, as I constantly trying to evolve and grow and learn, I'd written a book more focused on business than on healthcare. So the first book that I wrote was a few years ago, and it was the predecessor to a couple of the books that we've written since. It was called Blocking and Tackling, and that book was a not a great book. But it was intended to put a lot of my thoughts around business and investing and teams in one place, so that I had those. They're the same thoughts that we often come back to. So the first book came out. I really disliked how it came across, how it looked, the whole thing. Built a couple different businesses, but on the boards of several businesses, been an investor with private equity funds and venture capital funds and individual businesses. So then at some point, I got a professional review of it. I had a really close colleague review it and say, look, I like this, but if you want to make this really readable and good, you've got to do these things. And so I ended up going back to the drawing board last summer and spending literally about 2.5, 3 months rewriting or writing from scratch that book. And so that's the book that's coming out this June. Building great businesses, create momentum, overcome setbacks, and scale with confidence. We think it's much improved. It's a new book. We've gotten good feedback on it, on at least the drafts of it from different people that have read it. It's being distributed by Simon and Schuster. It's being published by a company called Forefront Books. We've been really pleased with the entire process, and we'll see how it goes. I don't have a specific. In some ways, I like to think of myself as a business thought leader as well as a healthcare thought leader, but more, it's challenge, it's interesting, it's iterative, it's a way to keep learning. I've been in my career now for 30 plus years. I am a huge believer that if you don't keep learning and keep on growing, you start to atrophy. And so we're a big fan of constant focus on mental and physical health and constantly trying to grow. And so this is part of that effort. And I was thrilled to go back to serious writing last summer. I haven't done that level of serious. So much of what we do in business is what I think of as short form writing. And so literally sitting down and writing a book of 37,000 words, I hadn't done in a while. And it was a great challenge. I really enjoyed it. And I'm hoping that people really enjoy it. And that's really the gist of it. But it's around building great businesses, create momentum, overcome setbacks, and scale with confidence. Yes, it's available on Amazon for pre-order, but would love people to pre-order it.
That you have for writing the book, and that alone is going to make it a must read. So I encourage everyone to go out and pre-order it. And I'm really excited to reading my copy when it comes in June. What would those areas be? Or is there anything that healthcare leaders, executives, entrepreneurs should be thinking about right now that we haven't touched upon?
I do think everything is around it's people and technology, and it's trying to get them to do what you need them to do and them to do what they need to do in a way that they thrive. Because we talk a lot about business, and I'll leave you with this. We talk a lot about business on this thrive concept that that your consulting firm is thriving and the consultants that are great consultants in your firm are thriving too, and it's not always going to be a perfectly aligned overlap, but that your leaders are thriving and you're thriving and the company's thriving, and there's this Venn diagram where there's enough of an overlap, enough of alignment that everybody lives their life, they thrive and you thrive. And we're a big fan of that in leadership. We're a big fan of this concept of thrive. We're also a huge fan of this concept, and I leave our leaders with this, that we call love your 90 percenters. So when you have people that do 90% stuff great, we're a huge fan of that. You gratitude, you pile praise on those people, you accelerate them, you grow with them, and so forth. And you try not to focus on the 5 to 7% that you wish they did better. That you focus on that you love your 90 percenters, that you believe in thrive cultures. You're almost never going to have 100% perfect alignment between an organization and a person, but you have to have high alignment. And you have to live with that in this world today of people balancing their families, their other interests, a million different things, with the fact that you're getting a great deal of somebody's energy and efforts, and you have to love them for it and just view it as thrive. And it's imperfect and it's great.
That's a great viewpoint. Thrive. I really like that. Focus on the 90% of the individuals that are doing 90% of the work that's good. It could be the person that you fail to fire. Because if we're focusing on those individuals that should not be on the bus or should not be on the team, and we're focusing all of our attention on what they're doing wrong and all the things that they're creating and the negative toxicity and the culture that they're responsible for, we're not focusing on the individuals that are doing the great work and giving them the accolades and the gratitude and the awards. And we're focusing on this other element that really we should be focusing on transitioning them out. So I love the thrive mentality.
No, we agree with that. And one of the hardest things in business, and this is remains hard for everybody that wants to build a serious business or build a serious health system or run a great practice, is that you have to ultimately make the effort to sort people out. And it's just a reality. You want people that are A's, B's, doing the work, good morals, good attitudes, good positivities. And then if you have people that won't do the work, don't do the work, bring a bad attitude, it is painful, but it ruins organizations if you don't make the effort to sort those people out. You end up spending a lot of time on those people. And really what you want to do is spend 90% of your time on your best people, your best performers, the people that are moving the thing forward. And you don't want to get distracted with challenging technology, challenging people, challenging anything. And it's an unfortunate reality. And it's not fun. It's no fun to say. People don't like it. But at the end of the day, in any business that you're running, you've got to be willing to sort people out, and it's challenging.
It is absolutely challenging. And one of my catchphrases is productivity produces positive results, but you can't get positive results in a negative environment. And that negative environment's created when you don't sort those people out. So,
Yeah.
Scott,
No, go ahead.
go
Sorry
ahead.
about that.
Oh, that's okay. Go ahead.
No, I think that's exactly right. It's an unfortunate part of reality, but execution and doing great stuff requires great people. And you got to love your great people, double down on them, keep on growing with them, keep on growing with your team. It's the same thing when you have great technology. You're going to double down on using the technology. It's why some of the most successful technology companies People try and use them for everything they can because they know they're getting what they need and it works. And it's constantly doubling down on great people, great teams, great technology, great customers, service lines that work, all those things. We're a huge fan.
What is the best advice that you've ever received from a mentor, a colleague, executive leader, coach, or business owner?
Sure. I go back to two pieces of advice that were given to me relatively early in my career. They came from two different people. One was a person who ran a major law group, a healthcare law group at a large firm, a guy named Jerry Peters. And Jerry had built this brilliant practice that was the firm that served Kaiser Permanente as it was growing. And really, Jerry was a remarkable lawyer and person. I'm not interested in currently, but he had sat down with me when I was a young lawyer, and he said the secret to building a big practice or a great practice and really serving a lot of people is you've got to build a great team. And it resonated with me. It was very similar to the Jim Collins good to great advice about everything's about building the right team. And he was so generous in advice, generous in his guidance, and he was right on about it. The second piece of advice that I remember vividly was when I was a young lawyer, and this goes back 30 years ago. The way that you got things done in big law firms when there was a lot of pressure is it was a very strident environment. You might yell at somebody when they messed up. You might push them and prod them when they messed up. And it was a very strident environment. And one of the people took me aside at one time and he said to me, a gentleman who's a lawyer named Marcelo Corpus, I think he just went to work actually for HSS, Hospital for Special Surgery. Marcel was a brilliant person, but worked on my team, but was junior to me. He pulled me aside one time, and this goes back, I would say now 27 years or so, and around there. And he said to me, look, when you yell at that person or treat that person like that, you might be right. But what you have to understand is you ruin the environment for all of us. So it was to his credit, he was willing to say it to me and pull me aside and do so and give me the advice. To my credit, I was able to, I'm not perfect, but I was able to largely change my management style on a dime to grow into got it. I understand what you're saying. And to really, I was always a person that loved people, but I probably took my cues from how firms were operated back in the day and professional environments were operated back in that day and was able to change how I managed and grew. And those were two pieces of advice that really stuck with me. And it just come down to everything's about teams and everything's about, at the end of the day, coaching in a mindset of gratitude, of being like thankful for what the person is doing. And the 90% advice we talked about earlier, love your 90 percenters. This comes out of me watching other people really beat on people that were doing a small percentage of things wrong. You follow me? And I'm like,
I
that
do.
person's overall doing a great job. They might not be Michael Jordan, but they're a very important part of what we're doing. So you better lay off that person and love their 90% they're doing well, and take out your anger someplace else. Deal with it someplace else. But those are attitudes that came out of watching a lot of this stuff. But two people that gave me great advice over the course of years that always stuck with me is this Jerry Peters and this Marcelo Corpus. They were just really helpful. There's others too, but those are two that always stuck out to me.
If our listeners would like to learn more about you, about Becker's Healthcare, about your books, where should they go and how should they connect?
Sure. So the easiest thing is obviously you follow me on LinkedIn, Scott Becker. That's the easiest thing. So on it often. But also Becker's Healthcare, you can find it online. But McGuire Woods is the law firm I've been with forever. People could always reach me at the easiest way to reach me is through LinkedIn and so forth. And God bless you for having me, Stephanie. What a pleasure to visit with you. Thank you so much for having me today.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Scott. Thank you for joining. We touched upon a lot of things that I hope our listeners found valuable, and everything that you've accomplished is extremely important. I think in today's healthcare environment, it's important for everyone to really understand how they can make a difference in their daily lives, and teams are a big part of that, people, technology. And to our listeners, if you found this valuable, I hope that you subscribe, that you comment, share this, and do yourself a favor and go out and pre-order Scott's book. Again, Scott, thank you so much for joining. If anyone would like any more information, you can find it in the show notes. And we'll see you on the next episode of Beyond the Benchmarks.
Thank you very much.